everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. Travis and I are covering Singleness this month, and this is the second week of doing it. And today we have Amy DeRoe on joining us here. And we want to talk a little bit about your experience, Amy, with going from being single to now being married. And we'll talk about a bunch of different things along the way, but just to kind of get started, what has your experience been going from single to married?
Largely pretty good. I would say that after I got married, people were a little bit more interested in inviting me over to dinner parties and like wanting to hang out and kind of getting to know us. And beforehand, I was like, well, I'll just kind of serve here and there and whatever and try to meet people that way. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of the typical story, I think, that we hear. And it's part of the reason why we want to cover singleness as a topic. But Travis, how does that make you feel hearing that?
How does this make you feel? Can I have a couch to lay down on?
Sure.
You know, honestly, it makes me think back to Hunter's episode where, you know, so much of what he said of like what he does and how he lives revolves around like serving, because it's like, I have so much more time to serve, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's interesting he didn't say, and this isn't on Hunter, this is just on maybe the culture we create for singles, is he didn't say, I have more time to invest in relationships and varied relationships. You know, because when you're married, you have to make sure that you are devoting enough time in the spousal relationship and then additional relationships. But when you're single, we always focus on you have all this time to serve and all these kind of things. But why don't we ever mention like, you have all this opportunity to invest in relationships? Yeah. And so that's just interesting.
And I'm just curious to kind of dive deeper into kind of your story a little bit. You know, you got married, just 4 years ago or something like that. Yep. 2020. And so you had a little bit of your adult life was single. Dive deeper into that experience of like, you weren't really invited all that much to build relationships. What was that like? How did it affect you, I guess?
It was kind of a bummer. I mean, I wanted to, because you do have a lot of time. You don't have like a family to go home and make dinner for or eat dinner with. So I was like, I would like to go out more. And I do feel like I hung out with people a lot, but it was just a lot of other single people. And so you would notice the group like, they get married and then they kind of go away to their whatever married group. And so it kind of, there was sometimes I would find myself where's a place for me to go? So I did dive into serving a lot because I think that's true. What Hunter was saying about you have a lot of opportunities to serve. And so building community through serving was really helpful. And that, helped me make friendships and community.
So you had a lot of single friends, but not a lot of non-single friends.
Yeah.
Was, no, not to like place the blame on you, but like, would you reach out to non-single people and like maybe they hang out for a little bit and go, or like why did that seem to not, blossom as much?
I would say both, because I would think, they're married and they probably don't want to hang out. And then also when people started having kids, then you're like, they're probably really busy being a parent. And then I also heard some of my married friends say, I got all the kids. Like, I don't know if you want to be around it, even though I didn't mind. Like, I would like to hang out with you and your kids. Like, I'll come to your house. Like, that's fine with me.
I think there is a lot of guilt when you have kids. I don't know if you experience this now, having a kid, of like inviting someone over. It almost feels like you're inviting them to like do work.
Chaos.
Because it's like, well, there's children here. So if you want to like occasionally help, clean something up or do like, you can't have a little bit of guilt, but that's where I think maybe we have we're misinterpreting the other side.
Yeah.
To me, it just seems like the culture we live in a different culture than the culture that we're talking about that we want.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you had grown up into a culture where, everybody, like even married and people with kids, were inviting, younger single people in or whatever it is, there wouldn't be that expectation of like, I don't, they don't really want to hang out with me, or, you know what I mean? And so it's like, how do we, I guess my question is, maybe I'm jumping way too ahead of the stuff here, but how do we address that cultural issue, so to speak, and then how do we make the culture that we want? And maybe you have better insight now that you're married.
Yeah, been both sides.
Yeah, well, because we just assume that the other side is thinking, oh, I don't want to
Yeah.
hang out with someone with kids, or like, oh,
Yeah.
they don't want to hang out with me. They're busy with their kids. And so now I do know that. And I make a point. I'm like, hey, like I'd like to hang out with you, but like, hey, you want to come to my house? Because then I can put her down for a nap and that'd be fine. So just being aware of it really does help. And then you can think, okay, this is where I'm at. I have a child with me now. How can but I want to get like hang out with this person. How can I do that within what my responsibilities are now?
Yeah. I think our culture's so individualistic that we're like hypersensitive to potentially being a burden on someone.
Yeah.
Like even potentially. And it just keeps us from ever having relationships that are deeper than surface level, because at some point you will be a quote unquote burden on someone by being any more than superficial.
Yeah.
But I've heard your sister Megan and a few of the girls her age say so many times that like moms in their 30s with kids are like the best people to ever hang out with. And for some people kids aren't their cup of tea, but in general, this idea that like, oh, you can't have someone over if the house isn't perfect, or you can't go out unless maybe you're on like the exact same stage of life or whatever, because there might be some burden for the other one that you're putting on them because you have needs that are different than them. I think it's just this individualistic culture going to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, and I definitely think to kind of go off of what you're saying is even more than that. I think even if we're not looking at single versus married and kind of building those relationships, but just actually like individually we are kind of self-centered a lot in this culture.
Kind of a lot.
And it's something that I think is a struggle with most of us. At least it is for me. And so it's like not even thinking about like, who am I building relationships with? It's like, am I even building relationships at all? And I think that's kind of a temptation, or at least it was for me when I was single. Obviously, I'm in school when I'm single. I didn't have a ton of adult life not being single. But for me, it was like, I just had my group and that was it. I didn't worry about anybody else. And it took away from what God was trying to do with me and through me. And so I'm curious for both of you guys, what kind of helps you get out of that self-centered mindset? And obviously we can't look at what others are doing to us or for us, but how did you get out of that self-centered-ish?
Well, I'll start. Amy's not a very selfish person, so she's having to try really hard.
Yes.
But I think hearing the other side has really helped. And I don't know if it's because of my position working with young adults or what have you, but I get so many different people telling me, well, this is how I see it. This is how I see it. And there's been multiple times where I've been like, do you understand? I had someone the exact opposite situation just talk to me last week. And like, you guys have to get together, like not them and like them specifically, but just like this idea of like, you're seeing from this side, but other people are seeing from this side, and you literally just don't understand each other. Like how you were saying that, sometimes it goes the other way with single people, where it's just like, oh, they stop inviting married people because they think, well, they just don't want to be with us. I've seen that happen multiple times, the last 4 years being here. And some of the married people being like, man, we feel like we're not invited to some of the stuff we used to do. And I had just had the single people be like, yeah, we stopped inviting them because we kind of figured that they were, busy doing married things. It's just like, all these assumptions are just insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't really go to selfishness. That's what came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I just think like, I think of the Holy Spirit, and I think of like the sanctifying process, and like the closer we grow with Christ, the more and more conviction we have to be close with others. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, you kind of have some like self-reflection of like, okay, who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? And if because I remember, okay, so having a baby, all these people brought me meals, and that was like a huge blessing, right? But these people knew me. And so I'm like, what if there's other people who don't know me, or like I don't know them and they need help too? And so it's just like this moment of realizing, oh, okay, like you can help people just by getting to know them and like being aware of their...
Yeah, they exist.
Yeah. Yes, they exist. And then I also think it's great to just ask. Like, people are adults most of the time, and they can just say no. Like, if they're like, oh, that's not going to work out for me, like, no thanks, or, you know. So it's like, it's always good to just actually just ask.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I you know, I love that we're talking about singleness, because really what we're talking about is like, let's just build relationships with everyone.
Yeah.
And it seems very like opposite to the topic, but it's just because of that cultural difference of what we've grown into thinking. Like, oh, singleness, it's just, you know, it's the before you get married, but that's not the case.
It's viewed as a temporary season.
Yeah.
And it's like, it might not be.
So diving into singleness on a deeper level, I guess you could say, is where, like, what were some difficulties? Like, why was it hard being single?
I think it was hard because I wanted to be married. And so I viewed it for a long time as, what's the opposite of a blessing?
Curse.
Of a curse.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah. And so you just lose gratitude for what you do have, being single. And then there's also kind of an awkward limbo of, okay, like, am I going to get married or am I not? Like, you know, because even though you want to get married and it's a good thing, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. So just having that mindset of like, okay, how do I prepare for life? But I want this thing, which would drastically kind of change the direction of my life. You know, so just which way do you go? Kind of awkward limbo. And then, No,
that's actually a really, I had never even thought about that, of just, you know, especially if you're trying to get established in life, if you want to take a career and that career kind of leads you away from, you know, maybe being like having a family or whatever it is, how do you know, like, what's the choice? I'm curious, like, how did you get over that?
Following Jesus. I mean, it sounds so cliche.
I thought you were saying getting married.
No, but like, before getting married, I had to really learn to be content with my circumstances. And, you know, you just do the next right thing, right? You just do that following Jesus. And so you're like, okay, I do need a better job. Okay, how can I do that? And then there's nothing to say, okay, if you meet someone, why couldn't you change jobs? You know, it seemed very final and, so it just learning to be grateful for what I had, and also like trusting in God and like his plan for what he had for my life. Cause I'm like, okay, if I really believe that Jesus is enough, then that means if I'm going to be single forever, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'll be fine.
Yeah, that's so good.
I think in general, we as people just hate doing things that feel like backtracking, where it's like, oh, I'm building up this thing, but then this big life circumstance changes and it's all for naught and I'm starting over. And we just have to remember that, like, God's path of life for us is not like a straight line from like A to B. It's not like, you know, any quote unquote backtracking from our perspective is not backtracking from God's perspective. Like, he wants you to do the next right thing, like you're saying. And if that eventually means that in 10 years, that next right thing becomes, you know, worthless, quote unquote, like, it wasn't worthless. In those 10 years, God accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. And we're always thinking, you know, we think about our lives as like building like Lego blocks on top of each other, and the taller the tower, the more able you were to obey God. And it's like, well, no, because God's building something entirely different than what you have in your head. And that might end up with a lot of small towers. It might end up with a completely knocked over tower. But the reality is like, God's going to do what he wants to do. And we have to be okay with our tower not looking as nice as someone else's at the end of our life, but recognize it was part of God's plan. Yeah.
And I like that you said that, because life really isn't a tower. Like, life
Babel was a tower now.
Yeah, exactly. And look what happened to that.
Yeah.
It's not good. So.
But it's like if you just look at like our physical bodies, like I'm not the same youthful kid that I was. Like
it's okay.
There's
Arthur, it's okay.
I know.
He's
I'm
not
getting
even
older.
In his 30s. Not even in his 30s.
But
it gets worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you can't expect to do the same things
forever
at the same ability forever. And so why would you expect that in your life? You know?
Did you get beat in tennis recently?
Really
is that
good.
Where this is coming from?
Honestly,
it's okay. You don't have to say. It's okay.
Okay, so those are some difficulties in being single. What were some benefits?
Being spontaneous. You could really like, hey, you want to go on a mission trip to Mexico? Sure, I can go on a mission trip to Mexico. Hey, you want to go out and do this? Like, you want to go on a hike this weekend? Sure, that's fine. No big deal. So that was, I think, a big benefit of just being spontaneous, having a lot of time to do, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
What about when you got married? What were some big differences?
Between
Spontaneity just out the window.
Going from singleness to married, taking some of those, like, obviously now that some of the downsides of being single are obviously not there, but then some of the benefits are not there either. So what was that like?
There's just a lot more planning that goes on, I think, being married. You have another person to consider. And so, hey, I wanted to go hiking this weekend. Oh, well, I actually need to work on your car, so you don't have a car, kind of thing. Or like, well, I want to do this thing, but you want to do that thing. So just, there's more communication that needs to happen. You also have like a whole other family too that, you need to, that takes up a lot of time, and it's great, but you just have less time, and those are the people you want to invest in a lot too. So
what about you, Travis? What was it like for you to go from single to married?
I think we mentioned this some with Hunter. I felt like our lives didn't change a ton just because we pre-marriage we were doing so much together already. We served in the same area of ministry. Like, there were so many similarities in that way that a lot of that didn't change. What really changed was when we had kids. That's when the scheduling and the other stuff really was like, because we could not serve in the same way. We could not do a lot of the same things. We were able to for a little bit, but that quickly went away. And I think like the just the flexibility, a lot of it went away.
So what about thinking? We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to dive deeper into it, now that you're married and you understand, because you went through this period of time where you had to kind of struggle a little bit until you kind of found your footing there with Christ. What about, like, what are you doing differently now that has helped other single people get to know you more or connect them? How can this community, like our church, do better at that? What are some thoughts?
I was really more aware of not trying to find someone else in the same area of life as me. And I think that goes to singleness, like, and also for like older people and younger people, that I was more willing to talk to kind of whoever. And I think greeting time at church is a great time because you're just sitting around random people. So you don't have to necessarily seek them out. Like, oh, I'll just get to know you because we're sitting next to each other. And then also like serving with people, like just kind of reaching out to them. I kind of forgot the question. Could you say it again?
No, you're answering it perfectly.
Okay.
I mean, you experienced a lack of, not full on community, but that kind of that relational aspect and variety when you were single. So how are you as a married person helping not have that happen, not perpetuating that problem?
And I see what you're saying. So and then also making the point I said it before, just asking like, hey, I can't go to coffee with you, but I'll make you coffee at my house. And just asking.
That is so the like stay-at-home mom, like, I'm not going to cook. Do you see me? Do you imagine me bringing this child? The wreckage that would happen. Come to my house. I have coffee.
I think that's what you guys do really well too. Is you have it's like often I'm invited,
and
you
never
always
do
invite
you
me.
come.
Well, very rarely. But you have young adults over. You have other families over. You have just single people over who you're just friends with. Like, I think you guys model that really well. Did you always model that well?
I'd say, when we were first married, we were like the first married in our friend group. And so you were off at college.
I was,
Be all terrible. But the rest of our friend group, we had over like all the time. We were the only, and part of that was because we were the only married couple. And so we had our own place. Everyone else lived with parents because we were young. And so we became the default place. And we would invite some older friends, stuff like that. So we had that early on and enjoyed that a lot. When we moved to Florida, I think what helped is we had such a like missionary type mindset there, helping start a church, that it was like
kind of baked in. Like,
it was
we
baked
gotta invite
in.
people in.
Yeah. And so that helped. When we moved back, however, we did notice, when we first moved back, it was a little bit harder to host. When we got our own place in town, it's like that. It was easier to start hosting again. And previously, having, like Alicia having a conversation with Amy and Amy telling her about, how hard it was for sometimes as a single person to be invited. We noticed that our defaults we were still trying at that point trying to just get to know people in general at Calvary, again. And it is really easy to fall into a trap of just inviting other couples because, those of you who are married know that like essentially when one of you becomes friends with someone who's married, it's very quickly like, what do you think of their spouse? What do you think of their husband? What do you think of their wife? And it's like, and so you immediately like you seek those out because like Alicia would meet, someone who's married and would be like, oh, well, we should have them over because you need to get to know him and you wouldn't get to know him unless we had him over because of how, just lives work. Yeah. And so it naturally becomes it's very easy to fall into that trap to where even after our experiences, knowing people's stories of when they were single or that they're single now has helped us because we started falling into that of just inviting couples because it's just easy. Yeah. And I think that's the reality is that no one's doing this maliciously. No one's doing this like out of like, oh, them or that. It really is just like what's easy. And sometimes, especially when life is just busy, like easy is nice. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's easy.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple questions, 2 questions, and we're going to first cover the singleness, and then we'll cover the marriedness. Let's just say someone who is listening, who is single, who is going through kind of that difficult time where they're struggling because maybe they desire to be married, maybe it's, they think it's taking longer than they want, or it's not happening at all. What's your encouragement to them?
To a single person in that stage, my encouragement is to really dive into what your purpose is in like following Jesus. So what do you want to do right now? What is Jesus calling you to do? Yeah. Just don't wait for the what ifs or the maybes. Like you're living now. And so just go for it.
Yeah,
what about you, Travis?
Yeah, I mean, tomorrow's not promised. Like, and who of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? Like, being frustrated at your situation doesn't help. Wondering what, like, trying to make a list of all things you do to change that doesn't really help. Like you're saying, just follow Jesus today. Like, tomorrow's not promised. Like, you might spend years worrying about this situation that never comes, and Jesus returns, and it's like, hey, how are you doing with the talents I gave you? How are you doing with the time I gave you? And I think the other thing is very much, you'd mentioned earlier, like singleness has started feeling like a curse. And I think that's the natural response of like, well, if marriage is a blessing and God's withholding a blessing, that means he's giving me a curse. Yeah. And I love how much Paul just emphasizes that singleness is a blessing and a gift, that marriage is a blessing and a gift. And so rather than focusing on, well, I'm not being given this blessing, it's like, which blessing have you been given? And focus on the benefits of that rather than on the lack of what you don't have. I mean, that's just contentment. Yeah. But
Yeah. And on the flip side, now that you're married, you can say this. What would you encourage people who are married who maybe are kind of stuck? They're watching this going,
stuck in their marriage.
I haven't really reached out to a lot of single people, and I don't really know a lot of single people. What would you encourage them?
I would encourage to include them like with other couples too. You don't have to be like just reaching out to the
single people.
Yeah. Like don't make it, kind of weird, but just like bring them into the fold as well. Like invite a wide variety of people to different things, being like, hey, us and some other families are going to go to a picnic. Like, why don't you come too? So just, just being aware of other people and thinking of that and reaching out.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it just comes down to being intentional, your favorite word for this podcast.
Oh yeah.
It's just the reality of, I think sometimes we can overcomplicate it just like we do most things, but it's like, well, you're having people over. Did you invite any single people? Oh, you have a home group. Are there any single people in your home group? Oh, you when you think of your close friends, are they only married people? and why is that? It's important to have variety of stages of life of people to speak into your life because they see from different perspectives. They have different giftings. One of my favorite things about, multicultural, we talked about this last year with the community series, is that seeing when we had our home group in Florida, we had people who were like in their 70s and people who were like in their super early 20s, people who were married, people who were single. And it was really cool seeing how they served one another in their giftedness and in their blessedness.
Yeah.
There's seasons that, when you're older and when you're very young, you usually have more free time. When you are married, you usually have more just family life to where you can like invite people in who don't have that. Either they don't have that anymore or they didn't have that before. Like there's blessings for each stage. And it's sad if you only are with married people, then you miss out on that blessedness of the flexibility and the all the stuff that comes from singles. And if you're only with single people, you miss out on the blessedness of like the family life. And so it's like you miss out on all the the blessings others have to offer and vice versa.
We don't live in a siloed community. We live in a community. Everybody's involved. No, I really appreciate everything you guys have said. I definitely, I'm looking at like my home group and I'm thinking, I don't have any single people in my home group. I guess the
single people, man.
So maybe God will provide those people that might be wanting to join up.
And we have a singles ministry. I don't know how currently active it is, but we have one. And of those, maybe 20 people, I'm not sure how many people are part of it now, but how many of them are part of home groups? And if they're not, think of if every home group suddenly had 2 single people in it or 1 single person in it, like how that would change the dynamic
that's how you change the culture of things.
How that would change the dynamic of like people feeling lonely. That was a big thing last episode. People feeling not included, people feeling like, you know what I mean? Especially, it's just kind of like how easily in some ways this could change, yet sometimes how hard it is to just take that first step.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much for coming on, Amy, and thank you so much for watching and listening and joining with us this week. We're excited to talk about this because we're trying to shift the culture, even if just by making people aware of things maybe you've never thought about. So thank you so much for watching, listening. And reminder, if you have questions, if there's something that we haven't talked about that you want to know an answer to or whatever it is, just a reminder, you can reach out, send in a comment, ask questions. We have that question form on our website. If you go to calvaryoli.com/follow podcast.
Look at that.
But, we're monitoring, comments on YouTube and whatever it is. So definitely drop those. I'm kind of excited to cover them and dive deep into them.
I hope you're monitoring comments.
I am. But yes, thank you again for joining with us, and thanks again for coming on. As always, God bless.